Racist cop stops black grandma carrying cash. Then the bank manager runs outside. Part 1. The walk she has taken 500 times. The kitchen at Jefferson's home cooking was already running hot by 6 in the morning. Opal Jefferson had been there since 5:50, same as every Tuesday, moving through the back with the particular economy of a woman who had done this long enough that her body knew the route before her mind did. The blue plate special for Tuesday was green beans, slow cooked with smoked turkey cornbread, and a portion of mac and cheese that had been calibrated over 3 decades to the precise weight that made people push back from the table feeling right. The beans had been going since 5:55. The cornbread batter was mixed. The mac was in the first stage, low heat, the cheese beginning its long melt into the cream base. She was 74 years old. She did not move slowly. She moved like someone who had decided a long time ago that there was no reason to hurry and no reason to lag and had found the pace in between and kept it. There was nothing theatrical about her efficiency. It was not performance. It was simply the way a person moves when they have done a thing so many times that the thing has become part of how they exist in a room. Jefferson's home cooking had been on Meridian Street since 1993. That was 31 years in the same building. The same front door painted the same shade of green. The same lunch counter that ran along the left wall with 8 stools that her late husband Raymond had bolted down on a Saturday in April of that first year. The counter had been refinished twice since then. The stools had new cushions. She had ordered them from a catalog in 2014, replacing the originals only after a customer had pointed out gently that one of them had developed a lean to the left. The door was on its 3rd coat of green. The green had lightened slightly with each coat, so that the door was now the color of new leaves, where the original coat had been the color of old ones. These were the kinds of changes that happened so slowly in a place that they seemed like the place aging rather than anyone's decision. Everything else about Jefferson's home cooking had the texture of something that had been touched so many times it had become smooth in the right places. 12 people worked there. 8 of those 12 had been there more than 10 years. That number meant something. In the restaurant business, 10 years from a single employee was unusual. 8 employees with more than 10 years at the same lunch counter on a commercial block in a mid-sized southern city was not a statistic. It was a testament to something that did not photograph well, but that everyone who had ever worked at Jefferson's understood the moment they had been there long enough to understand it. Opal Jefferson ran a place worth staying at. She paid on time. She did not play games with schedules. She remembered what people told her. She made decisions with the quietness of someone who did not require credit for the decisions she made. The neighborhood knew the staff by name. It knew them the way a neighborhood knows the people who feed it consistently, which is a deeper knowledge than the kind that comes from introduction or explanation. It is the knowledge of presence of Tuesday after Tuesday and Friday after Friday of faces that become part of the expected landscape of a place. It knew Cheryl, who had been on the counter since she was 22 and was now 33, and could recite the Tuesday special from memory on any day of the week. Cheryl had come in for the job on a Tuesday morning 11 years ago with a resume that listed 2 previous restaurant jobs and a reference from a community college instructor, and Opal had hired her before the conversation was over, because Cheryl had looked at the counter when she walked in and said it was beautiful, and she had meant it. It knew Dominic, who ran the grill on Thursday and Friday, and made the Friday peach cobbler that people drove across the county line to eat. Dominic had been at Jefferson's for 12 years. He made the cobbler from a recipe that Opal had developed over the first 5 years of the restaurant's existence through a process that was less development than accumulation. Each version slightly adjusted, kept or discarded based on whether it felt right when she tasted it the morning it came out, and the recipe now was the sum of all those adjustments written on a card in her handwriting that lived in a plastic sleeve in the back of the recipe drawer. The neighborhood knew the others, too, the ones who ran the prep, the ones who kept the kitchen in the kind of order that allowed a lunch service to run without chaos, The ones who had come to Jefferson's for the same reason Cheryl and Dominic had stayed, because the place was worth staying at. 3 generations of Meridian Street had eaten at the counter. Children who had grown up eating the Tuesday blue plate had brought their own children. Young couples who had come in during the early years of their marriages had returned with teenagers who sighed at being brought to the same restaurant again and then ate 2 portions of cornbread and asked about the cobbler. The table by the window, the foretop near the second pane, the one with slightly more sun in the afternoon, had been occupied by the same retired schoolteacher and her sister every Tuesday for 19 years until the schoolteacher passed, and then it had been occupied by the sister and the sister's daughter who had never eaten at Jefferson's before her aunt died, and now could not imagine a Tuesday without it. The daughter always ordered the green beans. This was what 31 years built. Not a landmark, not a destination, not a place that needed a review or a feature to tell people it was worth visiting. Something more durable than any of those things, a place that people had woven into the fabric of their actual lives, the kind of place that becomes part of the grammar of a neighborhood, so that when people described their Tuesday routine, they said Jefferson's the same way they said the pharmacy or the corner or home. At 10:43 in the morning, Opal wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and reached for the canvas tote bag on the hook near the back office door. The bag was old, canvas bleached soft from washing. She washed it every few weeks, hung it on the back porch of her house to dry, brought it back to the hook on Monday evening, so it would be ready Tuesday morning. The handles were worn pale where her palm had gripped them for 31 years. The fabric of the bag itself had gone from the stiff newness of something purchased to the yielding, settled quality of something that had been used so consistently it had conformed to its purpose. On the side of the bag, in letters that had once been bright blue and were now the color of a sky seen through thin clouds, the name Jefferson's Home Cooking. 2 inches high. Set in a simple block font that the print shop on the other end of Meridian Street had used when Opal had ordered 6 of these bags in 1993, the first year of the restaurant, because she had figured she would go through them. She had gone through 5 of them over 31 years. This was the last one. It was faded, but it was legible, the kind of faded that comes from being real and being used rather than from being neglected. Inside the bag, wrapped in a brown paper sleeve and banded in 3 places, was $4,832. That was the week's proceeds. Monday through Saturday of the previous week, minus payroll deductions, minus the supply costs for the week. The food order, the cleaning supplies, the paper goods, minus the small reserve she kept in the register, float to make change. What remained was $4,832, which she would walk 2 blocks up Meridian Street and deposit at First Covington Bank as she had done 51 Tuesdays a year for 31 years. The amount varied slightly week to week. Some Tuesdays it was $4,200. Some Tuesdays it was $5,600. The range told a story about what kind of week it had been, whether the Thursday dinner push had been strong, whether the Friday cobbler had sold out early enough that people who came in after 2 o'clock were turned away, whether the catering order for the church anniversary had come in during the same week as a slow Monday. Harriet Monroe, who had been the branch manager at First Covington Bank for 14 of the 19 years she had processed Opal's deposits, knew the range the way you know a pattern that has passed through your hands enough times to become familiar. She could look at a deposit amount from Opal Jefferson and tell you whether it had been a good week or a long week without asking a question. Harriet was 53. She had been at First Covington Bank for 22 years. She had started as a loan officer assistant and had worked her way through every position that mattered before being made branch manager of the Meridian Street branch 14 years ago. She had a desk near the front window because she liked to see the street and because the natural light was better there than anywhere else in the branch, and because 14 years of sitting near the front window had given her a relationship with the rhythm of Meridian Street that she considered part of how she did her job. On Tuesday mornings, she was always at that desk before 10:45 because she knew when the bag would come through the door. She was at her desk at 10:47 when she looked up through the front glass. A block and a half away on the far sidewalk, she saw a shape she recognized. The walk. The bag. The way the handles settled against a hand that had carried them for 31 years, which gave the bag a particular hang, not dead weight, but held weight the hang of something familiar. She could not yet read the letters on the side. She did not need to. She knew. She watched for a moment and then looked back at her screen. On the same block at the dry goods store, 3 storefronts down from First Covington Bank, Marcus Denny was restocking the front display near the window. He was 29 years old, had been assistant manager of the store for 2 years, and had worked the front long enough to know the rhythm of Meridian Street on a Tuesday morning, the way a musician knows the rhythm of a song they have played enough times that they can hear when something is off. He had seen Opal walk this block every Tuesday for 3 years. He knew her pace. He knew the bag. He knew the approximate time she would pass, and he had never once thought about the fact that he knew these things because they had simply become part of the furniture of his Tuesday mornings. He noticed the patrol car at the curb at 10:49. He saw it slow. He saw it stop. He did not take out his phone yet. He kept watching. Officer Travis Clem had been on the Meridian Street patrol rotation for 4 months. He was 36 years old. He had transferred in from a district on the north side of Covington in January, and he had settled into the Meridian Street beat with the comfort of a man who believed he understood his territory. He had driven this block on Tuesday mornings before. He had seen Opal Jefferson walk it. He had seen the bag. He had not stopped her before. On this particular Tuesday at 10:51 in the morning, he saw the canvas tote bag, and he made a decision. Marcus Denny took out his phone and opened the camera. Part 2. The first questions. Clem stepped out of the patrol car onto the sidewalk and said he would like to ask a few questions about what she was carrying. Opal stopped. She had been moving at her usual pace, the bag in her right hand, her left arm at her side. She stopped the way a person stops who is not surprised to be stopped, who has been stopped before, who has accumulated enough experience of this particular kind of interruption to have developed a set of responses that she kept at the surface because she had learned through long practice that the body's best response was stillness rather than reaction. She looked at Clem. She said, "I am making my weekly bank deposit for Jefferson's home cooking. The bank is half a block ahead. I do this every Tuesday morning." Clem said he understood that and he would just like to see what was in the bag. She showed him. She unrolled the top of the canvas tote and held it open toward him. He looked at the brown paper sleeve, the 3 bands of rubber holding it together, the slight bulk of the cash inside the paper. He asked her to remove the contents. She reached in and removed the brown paper sleeve and set it on the low ledge of the building wall behind her. A building ledge that shopkeepers sometimes used for packages that pedestrians sometimes used for a moment to set down something heavy. She set the sleeve there carefully. He looked at it. He asked her to open it. She broke the paper sleeve along its seam and folded it back, exposing the 3 banded stacks of bills. She set the stacks on the ledge in a row. Clem looked at the stacks. He said the amount looked substantial. He asked her where it came from. She said, "It is the weekly proceeds from my restaurant, Jefferson's Home Cooking, 1 block behind us on Meridian Street. I have operated it for 31 years. This is the weekly deposit. I make it every Tuesday morning. The bank is 40 yards ahead of us." Clem nodded. He said he understood. He said he needed to ask a few more questions. He picked up the 3 banded stacks of bills and carried them to the hood of his patrol car. He set them down on the metal surface. He broke the bands. He began to count. The bills were soft. Many of them were worn at the edges the way cash gets when it passes through many hands over many days, a restaurant lunch counter, the hands of a waitress making change, the hands of a customer counting out what they owe, the hands of another customer who pays in whatever denomination they happen to have pulled from their wallet. Some bills were crumpled and had been straightened out, the creases still faint in the paper. Some were old enough that the printing had gone slightly dull, the green less vivid, the president's face on the front less sharp. Clem made a comment about the condition of the bills. He said something to the effect that the bills were very well used for a business deposit. His voice carried the mild observation of someone noting something curious rather than something concerning, but the observation was a statement and not a question, and it sat in the air on the sidewalk between them. Opal said restaurant cash gets handled. People pay with what they have in their wallet. Some of those bills have been in someone's pocket for a month. Some of them came in as change from somewhere else. That is how lunch counter cash works. Clem kept counting. He kept counting because the bills were not the thing that concerned him most. The thing that concerned him was the amount, and the fact that someone was carrying it on foot, and the fact that he had made a judgment in the first seconds of seeing the bag from the window of his patrol car. And that judgment was now the thing he was building toward confirming rather than questioning. He had been on Meridian Street for 4 months. In the 14 months before his transfer, 2 complaints had been filed against him by black residents of his previous district in Covington. Both complaints described stops in which Clem had asked for documentation of ownership or source that was not legally required by any standard for a pedestrian stop. Both described detentions that had extended past the point where any initial basis, however thin, had been satisfied into territory, where the extended stay served no articulable investigative purpose. Both complaints had been reviewed and dismissed at the internal review stage. One stop had been flagged by a supervising sergeant as insufficiently documented, meaning Clem had not written enough in his stop notes to justify the length of the stop, but no formal action had been taken beyond the notation in his file, and Clem had not changed his behavior in any particular that was recorded. He continued to count on the hood of his patrol car. At 11:03, a man in a gray jacket walking west on the sidewalk slowed his pace and then stopped. He was Ed Garner, 61 years old, the owner of a hardware supply business on the next block of Meridian Street. He had been in business on this block for 20 years. He had eaten at Jefferson's home cooking more times than he could have counted with any accuracy. He knew Opal Jefferson the way longtime neighbors on commercial blocks know each other not intimately but continuously through the accumulation of Tuesday mornings and nods on the sidewalk and the shared understanding that comes from occupying the same street long enough to have watched it change around you. He stopped. He looked at the bills spread on the hood of the patrol car. He looked at the tote bag on the sidewalk beside Opal's feet. He looked at Opal standing with her hands at her sides on the sidewalk where she walked every single Tuesday. He looked at Clem. He told Clem that the woman he was speaking with was Opal Jefferson, the owner of Jefferson's Home Cooking, which was 1 block down Meridian Street in the direction Clem had come from. He said he had been watching her walk this block every Tuesday morning for 12 years. He said she walked it every week, same time, same bag, going to the bank. He said if Clem needed someone to confirm who she was and what she was doing, he was prepared to confirm it. He had known her for 12 years, and he would stake his word on it. Clem thanked Ed Garner. He asked Ed to step back. Ed looked at Clem. He looked at Opal. Opal gave him a look that was not asking for anything, not for him to push harder, not for him to escalate, not for him to do anything other than what was in his power to do, which was limited. The look was the look of a woman who had been in this position before in some form, and who understood the terrain better than Ed did. He understood the look. He stepped back to the edge of the sidewalk and stood there. Clem kept counting. The bills on the hood of the patrol car shifted slightly in the light morning breeze coming down Meridian Street. Opal stood on the sidewalk. Her hands were at her sides. The tote bag was on the ground beside her right foot, the name Jefferson's Home Cooking facing outward in faded blue letters 2 inches high. Clem had walked around the bag once, going to the patrol car with the cash. He had walked around it again, returning from the car with a notepad. He had not looked at the name on the bag. He had not asked about the bag. He thanked Ed Garner and kept counting. Ed had said it plainly. He had said everything Clem needed to hear from a source. Clem had no reason to discount a white business owner of 20 years speaking clearly, saying exactly who this woman was and exactly what she was doing. Clem had heard it. He had thanked Ed and kept counting. The bills were on the hood. The tote bag was on the sidewalk beside Opal's feet. The name on the bag was in faded blue letters 2 inches high, and Clem had walked around it twice and had not looked at it. Part 3. The 38 minutes. At 11:07, Clem made a call. He went to his radio and called in a currency verification check. He reported a pedestrian stop on Meridian Street, subject carrying a large quantity of cash requesting serial number verification and source confirmation on the bills. The verification line put him on hold. Recorded music came through the radio speaker thin and slightly distorted. He told Opal she would need to remain on the sidewalk while he completed the verification process. Opal said, "How long will that take?" She said, "The bank operates on a payroll timing schedule. My deposit needs to post before 11:45 in the morning for the payroll batch to process at noon. I have employees whose rent payments are scheduled for automatic transfer tonight. This matters to real people." Clem said he would try to make it quick. He turned back toward the patrol car. He had said he would try to make it quick. He had not asked about the bag on the sidewalk. He had not read the name on the bag. He had not made any note about the bag. He stood at his patrol car with his radio and his notepad and the bills in 3 stacks on the hood, and he waited for the verification line to clear. Meridian Street continued moving around them. Meridian Street on a Tuesday morning was not a quiet street. It had the particular energy of a commercial block in a neighborhood that was genuinely used by the people who lived in it. Not the traffic of visitors or tourists passing through, but the purposeful movement of people who had somewhere to be, who were picking up prescriptions, who were taking finished shoes from the repair shop, who were opening their businesses and settling into the first hour of the Tuesday workday. 3 restaurants within 2 blocks, 2 dry goods stores, a community pharmacy that had been there since before the restaurant, a barber on the corner who had outlasted 4 changes in the block around him. People moved. And among them, on the sidewalk in front of the hardware display that belonged to the shop, 3 doors from the pharmacy, stood Opal Jefferson. She had her hands at her sides. The patrol car was at the curb. The bills were on the hood. The bag was on the ground. People passed and looked and kept walking, or passed and slowed and looked and kept walking, or stopped for a moment with the look of someone who knows something is wrong but does not know what the right move is, and then kept walking. At 11:12, a second patrol car slowed as it came down Meridian Street. The officer driving it was a colleague of Clem's from the same district. He rolled down the window. Clem walked to the driver's side and spoke briefly in a low voice. The colleague looked at the bills on the hood. He looked at Opal. He looked back at Clem with an expression that was unreadable from Marcus Denny's angle at the dry goods store window. Then he nodded and drove on. Marcus Denny had not stopped filming. The footage was steady. He had braced his arm against the window frame and kept the phone level. The frame captured the bills on the hood in the center of the image with the patrol car behind them, and on the left edge of the frame, Opal's hands at her sides. The tote bag was on the ground at her feet. In the video, you could see the name on the bag, Jefferson's Home Cooking, clearly enough to read if you looked. Clem had not looked. He had walked around the bag twice during the stop. He had stood beside it when he spoke to Opal. He had been within reading distance of the letters on the side of the bag for the entire duration of the stop. He had not crouched to read it. He had not asked about it. He had asked about the money inside it. He had asked about business documentation that Opal did not carry because there was no reason to carry it to the bank when you were making a deposit. He had not asked the simplest question available to him, which was the question about the bag itself. The bag that had the name of the business on the side in letters 2 inches high. At 11:19, the verification line cleared. Clem received the results serial numbers not flagged in any stolen currency database. No alerts, no matches, no basis for any further detention on currency grounds. He wrote this in his notepad. He stood at the patrol car for a moment. He looked at his notes. He looked at the bills on the hood. He looked at Opal on the sidewalk. Then he walked back to where she was standing. He said the currency check came back clear. Opal said, "Then I would like to continue to the bank." Clem said, "I have a few more questions I need to ask about the originating business." He told her he needed to see some documentation verifying the business. A business registration document. A tax certificate. Something that confirmed the source of the funds. Opal said, "I do not carry my business registration to the bank. I carry the deposit and the deposit slip. I have done this every Tuesday for 31 years. My business registration is in my office at the restaurant 1 block behind us on this street. Clem said that was a problem. He said without business documentation he could not confirm the source of the funds, and the amount was large enough that he needed to confirm the source. It was 11:22 in the morning. 23 minutes remained before the deposit window for the noon payroll batch closed. Opal had been on the sidewalk for 31 minutes. She had answered every question Clem had asked. She had remained on the sidewalk without arguing, without raising her voice, without doing anything that could be interpreted as non-compliance. She had watched a man she did not know count her money on the hood of a car, make a call, wait on hold, receive a clear result, and then ask for documentation that no law required her to carry on a public sidewalk. She stood and she waited because she had no other option. Meanwhile, inside First Covington Bank, Harriet Monroe had been watching from her desk near the front window since 10:58. She had watched the patrol car stop. She had watched Clem step out. She had watched the tote bag go to the ground and the bills go to the hood. She had watched Ed Garner stop and speak and step back. She had watched the verification call. She had watched the second patrol car slow and the colleague look and drive on. She had watched Clem return to Opal after the clear result and continue the stop. She pushed back her chair. She stood up from her desk. She walked across the branch floor to the front door. She pushed the door open and stepped out onto the sidewalk. She paused. From this vantage point, looking across the street and down the block, she could see the whole scene clearly. The patrol car, the bills on the hood, Opal on the sidewalk, Clem with his notepad, the tote bag on the ground with the name visible on the side. She stepped off the curb. She crossed the street. The name on the tote bag had been facing out the entire time the stop had been happening. Clem had walked around the bag twice. He had never crouched to read it. He had never asked about it. He was focused on the money inside it. He had received every piece of information that should have ended the stop from Opal, from Ed Garner, from the currency verification, and he had found a new reason each time to extend it. The bag had been there the whole time with the name on the side in faded blue letters. He had not read it. Part 4. The cost of 31 years. At 11:15 in the morning, Opal Jefferson had been standing on the sidewalk for 24 minutes. Her hands were at her sides. Her posture was not collapsed, and it was not rigid. It was the posture of a woman who had decided long before this morning that the body's presentation in a situation like this one was its own form of communication. And she had decided what she was communicating: I am still here. I have not been broken by this. I will remain exactly as I am until this is over. Not submission, not apology, not the performance of harmlessness, which is a different thing entirely and which requires a person to become smaller than they are. Something older than any of those things, and more expensive composure as a chosen response to a situation that did not deserve it, held in place by a person who understood exactly what it cost and exactly why it was worth paying. She had been running a business on this street for 31 years. She had dealt with vendors who shortchanged her orders and then argued about it. She had dealt with city inspectors who arrived without notice and left without apology. She had dealt with customers who were wrong in ways that required her to be right without letting them know she was right. She had dealt with contractors who did not finish the work they quoted, and bank representatives who questioned her creditworthiness before she had built the history that made the question impossible to ask, and the long accumulation of small erosions that come for every black woman who builds something in a space that was not designed for her to build things in. She knew what composure cost. She knew what it was worth. She knew that the price of losing it in a situation like this one was paid not by the person who had provoked the loss, but by herself in the immediate moment in how the stop was documented, and in every interaction that followed from this morning. She was thinking about Dominic and Cheryl. She had not said their names to Clem. She had told him there were employees whose rent payments would be affected, and she had meant it as a statement of consequence rather than as an appeal. She did not believe that appealing to Clem's sense of consequence would change anything. She had said it because it was true, and because the record of what she said on this sidewalk mattered. But standing there, she was doing the arithmetic. Dominic's rent went out through automatic payment every Tuesday evening. a direct deduction from the account his landlord's property management company had set up 18 months ago when they moved all their tenants to direct payment. If the direct deposit was not in his account before the processing window, the payment was flagged as late and the late fee processed automatically at midnight. Dominic had told Opal about this not as a complaint or as a request, but as information shared between two people in a relationship where information needed to be shared. He had said it once, matter-of-factly, the way you tell someone something that is true about your life when you trust them to hold it without making it into something larger than it is. Cheryl's situation was its own weight. She had been in a rent-to-own arrangement for 14 months, purchasing the house she was living in from its current owner under a structured payment agreement that was contingent on consistent, on-time payments. 2 missed payments in any rolling 12-month period would void the arrangement and reduce to 0 the equity she had built during the months she had paid on time. She had told Opal when she signed the paperwork, because she needed Opal to know in the way that employees who depend on a paycheck sometimes need the person who signs that paycheck to understand what is riding on it. Opal carried both of these facts the way she carried everything her employees had told her. Not as a burden, but as information she was responsible for. As part of the weight of running a thing that 12 people depended on. She stood on the sidewalk and she did not say this to Clem. At 11:28, Clem was at his patrol car writing in his notepad. He was writing subject carrying large cash amount currency verification. Completed serial numbers, clear source, unconfirmed, awaiting business documentation for source verification. He wrote this as a matter of procedure. He was not distressed. He was not rushing. He was not uncertain about whether what he was doing was correct. He believed that the stop was justified, that the request for documentation was a reasonable extension of the currency stop protocol, that the length of the detention was within what the situation required. He was comfortable. He wrote in his usual handwriting, clear, unhurried, the penmanship of someone who had written a great many stop reports and had developed a consistency in the task. The tote bag was 15 feet from where he was writing. The name Jefferson's Home Cooking was on the side of the bag in faded blue letters 2 inches high. He had not read it. On the block, 2 business owners had come to stand in their doorways. They watched from across the sidewalk with the particular posture of people who have something to say and know that saying it will not help. Marcus Denny had not stopped filming. The woman in the green coat who had been eating at Jefferson's for 14 years was still at the corner. Still not knowing what the right thing to do, was still standing there because leaving felt wrong, even if staying was doing nothing. At 11:29, Opal spoke to Clem. She spoke quietly. She did not take a step toward him. She did not raise her voice. She said, "I have 2 employees whose rent payments process automatically tonight. If my deposit does not clear before noon, the payroll batch will not run on time and those payments will not go through. I am asking you to let me continue to the bank." She said it the way a person says something when they have moved past the argument stage because argument has not worked, and they are making instead a plain statement of what is true and what is at stake. Not an accusation of wrongdoing, not a demand, not a threat. A statement plain made by a woman who had been responsible for other people's financial lives for 3 decades and who understood with absolute clarity what was on the line in the next 16 minutes. Clem looked at his notepad. He looked at Opal. He was about to say something when the door of First Covington Bank opened across the street. Harriet Monroe came through the door and onto the sidewalk. She paused for one moment outside the bank, taking in the scene across the street. Then she stepped off the curb. She did not run. She walked at a steady, deliberate pace. The pace of a woman who had been managing a bank branch for 14 years, and who understood with the same precision, Opal understood the payroll timing, that her presence on this sidewalk was a form of institutional authority, and that authority required a particular presentation. Running would have read as alarm. It would have read as something reactive and emotional. Walking the way she walked with direction and without hesitation but without urgency, read as something else. It read as certainty. It read as a person who knew exactly what she was about to do and had no doubt that she had the standing to do it. She crossed the street. She reached the sidewalk where Opal was standing. She turned to face Clem. She said, "Officer Clem." She said it the way she said the name on his badge. Not a greeting, not a question. A form of address that established that she knew who she was speaking to and expected him to know who was speaking to him. When she said the word depositor, a moment later she said it without shortening what she meant. The word had the weight of 19 years behind it. Part 5. Harriet Monroe on the sidewalk. Harriet Monroe stood on the sidewalk between the patrol car and the front door of First Covington Bank, and she spoke. She said, "Opal Jefferson is a depositor and commercial account holder of this branch. She has maintained her account with us for 19 years. I process her weekly Tuesday deposit personally. I know this woman." She let that land for one beat. Then she said, "I have documentation of 41 consecutive Tuesday deposits in the amount range you are currently looking at on the hood of your vehicle. 41 consecutive deposits. That documentation is inside the bank behind me. It includes the account opening records, the 19 years of weekly deposit history, the commercial account statements, and the business registration that was provided and verified when the account was opened." She said, "If you need verification of the source of those funds, I have 31 years of it on file inside. Business registration, tax records, commercial account history, weekly deposit records going back to the year this account was first opened. 31 years. On file. Inside the bank that is 40 yards from where we are standing on this sidewalk right now." She paused again. She looked at Clem. She looked at the bills on the hood of the patrol car, $4,832 in soft, worn restaurant bills spread in 3 stacks on the metal of the car hood. She looked at the tote bag on the ground at Opal's feet. She looked at the name on the bag, Jefferson's Home Cooking, in faded blue letters 2 inches high, the bag she had been looking at through the front window of this branch every Tuesday morning for 19 years. The bag she had recognized from a block and a half away without reading the letters, because you do not need to read the name on something you have looked at every week for 19 years. You know it the way you know your own name. You know it the way you know the sound of a door you have opened 10,000 times. She said, "May I take Mrs. Jefferson inside now?" It was phrased as a question because courtesy required a form of question. But the expectation was built into the sentence, the way mortar is built into a wall, not visible but structural. It was the question of a person who had already decided the answer and was giving the other person the opportunity to arrive at the same place before the question became something else. Clem looked at Harriet Monroe. He looked at the identification lanyard resting against the front of her branch blazer. He looked at the blazer itself. The branch manager's blazer from a bank that was 40 yards away and had been on this block for longer than Clem had been on the force. He looked at the bills on the hood of the patrol car. He looked at his notepad. He looked at Opal, standing with her hands at her sides, 38 minutes into a stop on a sidewalk she had walked every Tuesday for 31 years. He looked at the tote bag on the ground. For the first time in 38 minutes, he read the name on the bag. Jefferson's Home Cooking, faded blue, 2 inches high, facing out. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am, go ahead." He stepped back. Harriet Monroe bent down and picked up the tote bag. She straightened and handed it to Opal. Opal took the bag. She reached past Harriet to gather the bills from the hood of the patrol car. The stacks that had been counted and restacked, the bills that had been handled and counted twice the cash, from a week of lunches and dinners, and Friday cobblers sold out by 2 in the afternoon. She rebanded the stacks and slid them back into the brown paper sleeve. She folded the sleeve and placed it in the bag. She settled the bag in her right hand the way she had settled it for 31 years. And they walked. Harriet walked at Opal's left, and Opal walked at Harriet's right, and they walked from the sidewalk to the curb, and from the curb into the street, and across the street, and along the sidewalk to the door of First Covington Bank. Harriet pulled the door open. Opal went through first. The door closed behind them. It was 11:31 in the morning. Marcus Denny lowered his phone. He had been filming for 40 minutes from the moment Clem stepped out of the patrol car to the moment the bank door closed. He had the whole sequence, the initial stop, the cash on the hood, Ed Garner stopping and being thanked and asked to step back, the colleague in the second patrol car slowing and looking and driving on. The 38 minutes of standing, the comment about the condition of the bills, the verification call, the clear result, the extended stop, Opal asking to go to the bank, Harriet coming through the door, the conversation on the sidewalk, the picking up of the bag, the walk. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to restocking the front display. Inside First Covington Bank, Harriet Monroe walked Opal directly to the commercial deposit window. Opal's hands were steady. She had been steady through the entire stop, and she was steady now, though the steadiness cost something she would account for later in private in the way that composed people account for the price of their composure. She filled out the deposit slip the same way she had filled it out for 31 years, the account number from memory. The amount, $4,832, written in the boxes, the date, her signature at the bottom. She slid the slip and the banded cash across the counter. The teller processed the deposit. It posted at 11:43, 12 minutes before the payroll window closed. The payroll batch ran at noon exactly as it was scheduled to run. That evening at 6:03, the automatic rent transfer for Dominic cleared from the Jefferson's home cooking payroll account to his personal account and settled without delay. At 6:17, the automatic rent payment for Cheryl processed the same way, transferring to the account her landlord used for the rent-to-own arrangement, settling before the 6:30 window that would have triggered a late flag. Neither Dominic nor Cheryl knew on that Tuesday evening that anything had come close to going wrong. They received their transfers the same way they always did at the same time they always did, and they did not think about it because there was no reason to think about it. The thing had worked the way it was supposed to work, and the reason it had worked was 40 yards of sidewalk and a woman in a branch blazer who had known a canvas tote bag by sight for 19 years. Marcus Denny posted the video at 7:41 that evening with a brief written description. Bank manager comes out to defend a regular customer being detained on the street, Meridian Street, Tuesday morning. He posted it without any particular expectation. He had filmed it because something had seemed wrong, and he had wanted there to be a record of what was wrong. He posted it because he thought people should see it. By 9 o'clock in the evening, 2 regional news stations had shared the video on their social media accounts. By the following morning, it had been viewed 140,000 times. The specific frame that circulated, the one that became the image associated with the story, was a still taken from the moment Harriet Monroe was standing on the sidewalk facing Clem branch blazer identification lanyard, the bank door visible in the background. In the lower left corner of the frame, the tote bag was visible on the ground, and the name Jefferson's Home Cooking was legible in faded blue letters. The frame contained the whole story. People who had not read a single word of context for it understood the story from the frame. The county's Law Enforcement Oversight Office received a formal written complaint from First Covington Bank's legal counsel before 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. The complaint contained a copy of the full video, the account documentation that Harriet had referenced on the sidewalk, 41 consecutive Tuesday deposits, 19 years of account history. The original business registration from when the account was opened in the first year of the restaurant. The time-stamped record of the deposit posting at 11:43, and a specific accounting of the payroll timing pressure the stop had created. The review board convened the following week. They examined Clem's stop documentation against the video and the account records and his 2 prior complaints from the previous district. They examined the question of whether the initial stop had an articulable basis beyond the presence of cash. They examined the procedural basis for the currency verification request, the legal authority for the business documentation request, and the question of whether the 38-minute detention length was proportional to any articulable cause at any point in the stop. They found that the initial stop lacked articulable probable cause beyond the mere fact of someone carrying cash on a public sidewalk. They found that the detention length was not supported by the circumstances. They noted that a witness had verbally identified the depositor and the purpose of the walk before the 11-minute mark of the stop. They noted that the currency verification had returned clear at 11:19. They noted that the business name was visible on the tote bag throughout the entire stop, and that no inquiry had been made about the bag. They noted that the business documentation request had no applicable legal authority in the context of a pedestrian stop. They issued a formal written reprimand. They required mandatory retraining in currency stop procedures, documentation standards, and the legal scope of pedestrian detention. The stop was entered permanently in Clem's personnel record, alongside the 2 prior complaints, creating a documented pattern that would be part of any future review. It was not enough. People who watched the video said so in the comments and in letters to the newspaper, and in conversations on Meridian Street among people who had watched Opal Jefferson walk that block every Tuesday. It was not enough for what had happened, but it was real. It was in the file, and the file was not going away. Part 6, the Tuesday after and the years after that. The following Tuesday at 10:49 in the morning, Opal Jefferson wiped her hands on a kitchen towel in the back kitchen of Jefferson's Home Cooking, took the canvas tote bag from the hook beside the back office door, and walked out the front of the restaurant onto Meridian Street. The morning prep shift was running exactly as it always ran. The Tuesday blue plate beans had been going since 5:55. The cornbread was in. Cheryl was on the counter handling the early customers who came in before the lunch rush. The retirees who liked to come early when it was quiet. The delivery workers who stopped in before their morning runs, the woman and her sister who had been coming every Tuesday for years. The kitchen was moving. Opal walked out onto Meridian Street and turned left. She walked the same 2 blocks she had walked every Tuesday for 31 years. Same pace, same bag, same route. The letters on the side of the bag were slightly more faded than they had been the week before, or perhaps they were the same. It was the kind of fading that was too gradual to perceive in a single week. Jefferson's Home Cooking in faded blue, 2 inches high, still legible. At First Covington Bank, Harriet Monroe was at her desk near the front window. She was reviewing a loan modification file, reading the notes she had made the previous day when she looked up. From a block and a half away through the front glass, she saw the shape she knew. The walk. The bag. The way the handles hung against the hand that had carried them for 31 years. She stood up from her desk. She did not know she was going to stand up until she had done it. It was not a decision she made in the way you make a deliberate decision. It was the body's response to something it recognized the way you stand when a person you care about enters a room before you have thought about standing. She stood at her desk and watched Opal cross the street and approach the bank door and push it open. And then she was at the counter, ready the way she had always been for 19 years every Tuesday. The deposit that second Tuesday was $4,519, slightly lighter than the week before. The Thursday dinner push had been slow. But the Friday cobbler had sold out by 2 in the afternoon, which was early, which meant the Saturday morning rush had been strong. The deposit posted at 11:38, well inside the window. The payroll batch ran at noon without incident. A regional news station ran a follow-up segment the month after. The piece focused on Opal's 31 years on Meridian Street, on Jefferson's Home Cooking, on the employees on the lunch counter on the Tuesday blue plate, and the Friday cobbler, and the 3 generations who had eaten there. A photographer came on a Tuesday and spent the morning in the restaurant and on the block outside. The photograph that ran with the piece was taken from outside the restaurant through the front window, looking in the lunch counter running along the left wall, the 8 stools, the occupied tables with the Tuesday blue plate in front of every person. The light from the front window falling across the room and through the back of the frame in the kitchen doorway, barely visible. Opal moving a shape and motion in a place that had been her place for 31 years. The photograph did not need a caption. The story was in the frame. Dominic and Cheryl learned what had happened the week after it happened. Dominic heard from a customer who came in on Wednesday and mentioned it the way you mentioned something you assume everyone already knows. Dominic had not known. He had received his direct deposit Tuesday evening at 6:03, exactly when he expected it, and he had not thought about it because there was nothing to think about. He processed the information about what had come close to going wrong with the particular quiet of a person who does not know what to do with the fact that someone they trust has paid a price for them without telling them. Cheryl heard the same day from a different source. She spent the rest of her shift on the counter without saying anything about it. The following Tuesday, before the lunch rush, she went into the back kitchen during a quiet moment. Opal was at the prep table, hands in the beans, checking the seasoning. Cheryl set a card on the table at the edge of the prep surface within Opal's reach. Then she went back to the counter. Opal found the card after Cheryl was gone. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened it. The card said, "We know what you did." Nothing else. No explanation, no elaboration. Just those 5 words in Cheryl's handwriting, which was small and slightly slanted, the handwriting of someone who had learned to write quickly and never unlearned it. Opal stood at the prep table with the card in her hands for a moment. Then she folded it carefully with the particular care you give to a thing that is small but real, and she crossed to the office and opened the drawer beside the door, the drawer where she kept the things she did not throw away, the newspaper clipping from 2001, when the Covington Gazette had done a small feature on Meridian Street businesses, the letter from a woman who had eaten at Jefferson's every Tuesday for 20 years before she moved away and had written to say thank you, the card her late husband Raymond had put on the restaurant counter on opening day in '93, the drawer that held the things that were not for show but were for keeping. She put the card in the drawer. She went back to the prep table. The beans were ready. The cornbread was in. The Tuesday blue plate would be on every occupied table in 2 hours, the same as it had been for 31 years. Marcus Denny's video was referenced the following year in a county banking equity study that examined patterns in pedestrian currency, stops in commercial districts across several neighborhoods in Covington. The study noted that Black residents and business owners were stopped at a rate that was disproportionate to their presence in those districts, and that the stops that extended past the 15-minute mark were concentrated in stops involving Black individuals carrying cash amounts consistent with small business deposits. The video was cited as one of the few cases in the study period in which an intervention had occurred during a stop rather than after it. Harriet Monroe's action on the sidewalk was described in the study as an instance of institutional ally action in a real-time currency stop context, meaning that someone with institutional standing had used that standing during the event itself, rather than in a subsequent complaint or review. 8 months after the stop, Harriet Monroe was invited to speak at a regional banking association conference on branch community relations and equitable service practices. She was introduced by the conference moderator as the branch manager who walked outside. She stood at the podium. She said, "I walked out because I recognized the bag. I have been looking at that bag every Tuesday for 19 years. That is all it took." She paused. She said, "I did not need a report. I did not need someone to call me and describe what was happening outside my window. I did not need anything except what I already had, 19 years of paying attention to the person who brings her business to this branch every Tuesday morning. I looked out my window. I saw something I have seen every single Tuesday for 19 years, and I understood that what was happening was not right, and I walked outside." She said that is what 19 years of paying attention looks like. That is what it is for. She said nothing else about it. She moved on to the rest of her prepared remarks, which concerned documentation standards and equitable lending practices, and the relationship between branch managers and commercial depositors in underserved neighborhoods. But those few sentences were the ones people wrote down. They were quoted in the write-ups of the conference that circulated through banking association newsletters and community organization reports, and a small number of newspaper columns over the following months. They were quoted without the full context of the surrounding remarks, and they still made complete sense because the story behind them was already known, and because the sentences were already true on their own, the way true things are. The tote bag is still on the hook beside the back office door at Jefferson's Home Cooking. Every Tuesday morning, Opal takes it down. Every Tuesday morning, she makes the walk. The letters on the side are more faded now than they were in Marcus Denny's video, but they are still legible, still there. Still 2 inches high, the color of a sky behind thin clouds. The words carrying the weight of 31 years of the same Tuesday morning walk, Jefferson's Home Cooking. The restaurant is still on Meridian Street. The door is still the same shade of green or close to it, the third coat having lightened the green slightly from the original so that it is now the color of new leaves where the first coat was the color of old ones. The lunch counter runs along the left wall. The 8 stools have new cushions. The foretop by the window is occupied every Tuesday. Cheryl is still on the counter. Dominic still makes the Friday cobbler. The Tuesday blue plate is still green beans, slow-cooked with smoked turkey, cornbread, and mac and cheese calibrated to the weight that makes people push back from the table feeling right. And every Tuesday morning, Harriet Monroe is at her desk near the front window of First Covington Bank, looking out through the front glass at the block and a half of Meridian Street she has been looking at for 19 years. She looks up when the bag comes into view. She stands up before Opal crosses the street. She is at the counter when the door opens. She has been there for 19 years. She will be there next Tuesday. If this story found you, please subscribe to this channel so you are here when the next one comes. If you believe that 31 years of showing up deserves to be protected like this video, it tells the algorithm that this story is worth finding. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and leave a comment below. Tell us about someone in your life who has been building something quietly for a long time and what that building means to the people who depend on it. We read every comment. We are here every week with another story.